Okay, here's another debunk from y'all. This is again Mr. Hotep who can't quit. He feels like he's just getting started, and you wouldn't believe all the comments down below on this, trying to say that Bantu were in Egypt somehow and that people just don't know. We'll maybe take a look at that towards the end of this. But let's look at his starting point and go from there. The name of this video that he's put out is TikTokers Are Rewriting African History, and Here's How. The strange, ironic statement there is that he's a YouTuber and he's trying to rewrite African history, and let's show you how. Shall we?
Egyptians actually look like this. Egyptians actually look like this. Scientists have found mummy after mummy after mummy of all of these Egyptian pharaohs or kings that look like this, with orange or blonde hair. These kings had the R1A haplogroup Aryan or European gene.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Indeed, here we go again. Well, the kid misspoke right there because what he was meaning to say was R1B. We'll catch that later in it, and Mr. Imhotep will think that he's really done something whenever he shows that. But let's continue with this, and let's hear his statement.
EJ, that's exactly how I felt after watching that video. But the most significant issue goes beyond this. The real problem lies in the response to that video, coming from a TikToker known for debunking myths. He attempted to provide a fact-based answer, which seemed well-intentioned, but ended up adding more confusion to the topic. This TikToker has millions of followers, and his videos have been viewed by hundreds of thousands, possibly millions by now.
Well, you're showing millions, so you know it's been millions, I guess. There's been a lot of views on this guy, but that doesn't mean anything. I know a guy that does videos on race cars, and he's got millions of views. But if you were to ask him about Egypt, he may not be able to give you an answer. Sad to say that the guy that he's trying to pick out here is somebody who's trying to play baseball here a little bit and act a little ambiguous, and then try to act like the current population is kind of just what it was before. Whenever genetics has come out that Mr. Imhotep is going to show himself, and they said, oh no, the demographic has changed. In fact, the current population only has about a 1% connection to the ancient Egyptians. Now this is whenever they did the huge test out of the graveyard or necropolis at Abu Sir el-Melik here a few years back, and I'll even show you one of the papers and what's been written about it. Or I think he shows the exact same thing and then tries to go, oh, they're trying to lie about it. Like, well, let's see. These are scientists, they're genetics, they know what they're talking about. And are they trying to lie? Or is it you, Mr. Imhotep? Well, it's actually you, Mr. Imhotep. And everybody knows it, except for blacks who desperately don't like their own history, and they're in a constant attempt of trying to claim that they used to be somebody else. This is really a problem with the West African Bantu people. They're a sub-Saharan pre-Neolithic people that never even knew Egypt existed. But now they found out. They're extremely jealous, and they try to make all kinds of comments. Join me, won't you?
Many of these viewers may consider his answers to be true. In essence, despite his efforts to provide a fair answer, he inadvertently misleads millions of people. That's why I am determined to address both videos as accurately as possible. Now, before we dive in, let's listen to the response from the second TikToker, Aslan Pahari.
Hello, my friend.
Well, before he hello my friends you an answer, I'm going to mention the fact that he's not going to even do what he said he's going to try to do. In fact, looking at the information, he tries to infer something that no one else in genetics or anybody or archaeology agrees with. In fact, it's come out more and more that there's a Nordic type people that were there in the pre-dynastic Egypt, as shown by Ginger, the blonde-haired Gibbeline mummy, and so on. Even Khufu's granddaughter shown as a redhead. And they talk about it in papers all the way up to World War II. But after World War II, this weird thing started happening where they started trying to discount an Aryan type of thing because of what happened with World War II, and therefore we're left with this ambiguous type attitude. something that I somewhat grew up with, but I found whenever I was growing up that all the old papers, they were certain of it, and everybody was real certain of it. And at that point, they didn't have DNA quite figured out yet either, or anything to be able to use it in any way. They were using all known archaeology, what everybody said, everything. But you'll find blacks try to misuse that. Let's see how he tries to misconstrue what this man says here, who, I don't know if he's an expert on Egyptology, genetics, or anything whatsoever, because he's going to repeat the R1A thing that the kid did there, agreeing off into him, and that could just be a misspeaking, or the fact that he goes, yeah, I know it was R1, well, he says R1A, and then later Mr. Hotep struts around like he did something. Let's watch.
Correct. Were ancient Egyptians European-like in appearance? Well, I would say to simply say yes would be...
Yes. To simply say yes. So, yes, but what?
misleading. Mummies that have been...
He's saying it would be misleading, perhaps, if he said that they all just look like Europeans. Why? Well, all craniometry, archaeology, and everything shows there was a large Mediterranean, North African, Berber type, phenotype, everything. There's their bodies, there's everything. A huge population of them, along with what appears to be a Nordic ruling class. I'll show that to you shortly, but let's get into this more. There are mummies that have been shown, like Ramses here, who has Caucasian hair, and it's red, and they say, well, it's stained with henna. Well, they checked it out scientifically and said he used to be a redhead in his youth. It's not uncommon. You'll also see me mention that this was a re-upping that they found in all of the cranial data that goes along with ancient Egypt and all the ones they've seen, and they go, you know, there was a Nordic thing starting this all out, and a little mixed wishy-washy in the middle, but you know, these people really even inbred to the point of trying to keep themselves from that. But it did go wishy-washy a little bit in the intermediate periods, but in the 18th dynasty it came back to its former fruition, which leads into the 19th dynasty where Ramses is here, but is exclusively talking about King Tut's dynasty and Akhenaten and so on too. But that's not to mean that there weren't a large contingent of Nordics there. And after hundreds, over 1,000 years of so many children not being the pharaoh, being scribes and major people and players of the game, they had children, it got up to be hundreds of thousands of this Nordic type people, and they started breeding with the local population. It's one thing that they looked at as being wrong, and they even went to the point of inbreeding with each other to keep their family line going. Pretty important. Let's continue.
with coloured hair, that itself is quite a rare occurrence, and should not be seen as a representation of the general appearance of ancient Egyptians. Ancient Egypt was a great civilization with a large population that faced migration over centuries, so obviously the migrations are going to affect the gene pool of the native population, especially in urban areas.
Well, he scratched the record stop, and I want to do that too. You know, whenever they did this massive test in Abu Sir El Melek's necropolis, one thing that they were looking at, because they were looking at people all the way back from the Middle Kingdomish time all the way through into Roman times, and they thought they would be able to easily see some flip-flopping here, and the genetics change whenever the Persians took over, or these people took over, or those people took over, the Greeks later, and then the Romans. The funny thing in the papers, they showed, no, they have a continuity, and it has a continuity also in other papers that wrote about how the earliest dynasties and all the other DNA we've gotten from the earlier ones possible are showing us that this is all a continuity of over 7,000 years. And it didn't actually ever involve black people. Let me clearly state right here that the people are trying this, Mr. Imhotep and so on, are West Sub-Saharans, or Congoids, whichever way you want to look at it. And those people didn't know Egypt existed and aren't related to anybody who knew Egypt existed. As far as like the Khoisan, or the Horner type people, or what we call Nubians or anything else. Just because they have dark skin doesn't mean we, but you'll find that black people have this mental problem where they can't realize that nobody's related to them. We're talking about genetics a little bit now. A couple of years ago, they came out and they finally decided to let it out, that blacks had up to 19% of an unknown ghost hominid in their DNA that no one else in the planet has. Therefore, they're not related to anyone. And they sure weren't the progenitor of anyone. I made videos showing you the reality of who Aslar man is at 4500 BC, or 4400 now. It's been renamed or redated. And in that's the oldest known current modern Negroid form. You'll see if you look up Aslar man that actually they mention Iwuliru and others that'll lead almost to the Holocene or the end of the last ice age, but they don't have anything before that, but they still have a Negroid phenotype. Problem is they're a 4 foot tall, small brain, football headed, still extant Homo erectus type form that really was well below pre-Neolithic state. And the reason blacks today from that area in a huge amount actually have E1B genetics is because North African Berbers, Caucasians, had E1B genetics. And apparently they went down there and ruled over them and admixed those people, and it wasn't a one-time event in any way, shape, or form. And after they did this for a while, the people with the larger heads that were a hybrid of this still extant Homo erectus species started taking over. Now that's just in West Sub-Saharan Africa, but Egyptologist 7 has also made videos showing you every Horner and every people in concern there that are all East African and stuff, and that they also have admix. A large amount. I believe West Sub-Saharans without additional admix from slavery and things that happen in a modern form, having hybrids and so on, that they have a 22 to 36% Caucasian admixture to them, and then that's what imparted them with this E1B genetics he'll talk about here later. But also, that same type of event got R1B genetics into Africa, which you'll easily be able to tell by looking at the scale that even he tries to show that, wow, so it's all Europeans that have this haplogroup now, and there's a blurb over here in Sub-Saharan Africa that has R1V88 form, so that's from admix. Not that there's any way that someone could actually pop up a special type of R1 genetics and it not be from those people. It does not work that way. Just like E, and everybody, E1B, any E is all related to Eurasian CT, and that goes back to Eurasian Adam and Cro-Magnon people and so on. So let's see what he has to say with his scratch record.
Aslan's response is intriguing. As I mentioned earlier, he's trying to provide accurate answers, but there are some significant errors. The original video talks about archaeologists finding mummy after mummy after mummy with blonde and orange hair.
Found mummy after mummy after mummy.
Meaning that the ancient...
Well, mummy after mummy after mummy, and he just showed 3 whenever he does that. But I actually had a list, and it's in my videos, where I showed that there is over 277 depictions on tombs of people that are either red-headed or blonde-headed. I just recently did one that I showed that he was red-headed and she was blonde-headed. Just look just a few dates back or rather, Paneb was his name. In his tomb, it's all been shown. Let me also quickly make the statement that these are covered with a shellac. This blonde-haired man that's shown here looks like, Abraham Lincoln in his 30s with blonde hair. He doesn't have a Negroid phenotype whatsoever, but blacks can't stand that, and so they try to make up weird, stupid lies that are easily debunked by using things that have already been debunked well before they even tried this. It's hilariously sad. King Tut's great-grandparents, Thuya and Yuya, are both stark blondes. Khufu's granddaughter from the Great Pyramid is a blonde. The Egyptian nobility said they ruled over the dark-haired people. So did the nobility over the Sumerians. They said dark-haired people. If I said red-headed, you don't think they're black people with red hair. When I say dark-headed, they said, see, they're black. And it's like, no, Egyptologist 7 is dark-headed. There's so many people that are dark-headed. What is special about it is that light, fair-hairedness that shows up that they tried to write off and say, oh, that maybe that's mummification process and so on. And Janet Davies, a professional Egyptologist, took and put different types of hair, including black people's hair, in natron, and it sure didn't straighten it out and turn it into Caucasian hair, much less it didn't change it one single shade of color. And she realized that they all had that. Then she made an ambiguous comment that there was probably more of them in the later dynasties, but the ones that drew her attention in the first place were these ones through the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom area that we've talked about with Thuyu and Yuyu and all these. It'll show up in his thing here a little bit. Let's go.
Egyptians resembled Europeans. Aslan, however, states that Kemet was an ancient civilization with a large population influenced by migrations, which impacted their gene pool.
The only thing about that is the Abu Sir El Melek paper, who was looking for exactly that same thing. They had signatures in there that would find if little things poked in and stuff, because Persian DNA is not quite what these people were. And these, well, they didn't have nobility of Persian DNA, by the way, but in doing so, they thought they would see a discontinuity, a flippy floppy, and then coming in slowly getting down through time, and it would change somehow. When it starts off, it's not Negroid or black in any way. It's Nordics ruling over Mediterranean types and Near Eastern people. And he keeps repeating that off to it, almost like that doesn't mean anything. Of course, after this, he'll turn around and claim we was Bible, we was Anatolia, we was everything. I've recently had a few videos where they started claiming they're the Etruscans, they were the Sumerians. Basically, everyone except for themselves. Isn't that oddly self-exposing? But yeah, they were looking for this change over time, but that never happened. The Egyptians kept themselves, and it's shown up now in genetics, proving it. Whereas before we also had craniometry and everything, and comments like Nordics were starting it out, it got a little wishy-washy in the middle, but they're still there, and then it grew to its greater strength during the time of the greatest pharaohs that we know of, and Akhenaten and King Tut and Ramses the Great and all the ones that went along with that. And when you look at them and Seti and everybody else, they have Caucasian type hair, but a lot of those are redheads. And so what's the deal? You wouldn't believe it, but Nordic type people have that type of hair, light eyes and so on. And a little later I'll show you some of that.
Is it true? In my opinion, absolutely. To explore this topic in greater detail, I highly recommend watching my in-depth video dedicated to this aspect. Now let's go back.
I highly recommend you don't watch a video where he tries to take a Bantu and stick an Egyptian headdress on them because of their jealousy, and then take somebody that looks like 50 Cent and put him in there and start complaining or comparing these other people, even trying to put a Chinese off in here and get this real multi-ethnic idea. The Egyptians, I've got a video on this, the Egyptians did not allow the Bantu people into Egypt. Why? Because they didn't even know they existed, and the Bantu didn't know Egypt existed. Who did know were what we call the Nubians. Nub is just a name for an area of gold that's in the southern Africa. They also had one up towards the Delta before, but it ran low. So then they had these people doing it for them or whatever, but they weren't allowed into Egypt. In fact, crazily later, he'll show one and say, look, he's black or something, and that's Sensuret III. He's one of the ones that set up a stele and said that no blacks are ever allowed into Egypt. They can come here to and drop off their stuff. So whenever you see on the walls people giving stuff in praise to Ramses and everything, they really had to stop there at the border and give it to them. And then that got passed on. They didn't get to go all the way through Egypt and things like that. They weren't allowed. Now, it says they treat them nice, though, if they're just coming to do that. But the problem is that they're usually coming in, raiding and doing things like that, and they had ended up running them off. I've got another video called something like the constant conquest of Nubians from Egypt, and it shows all these things that are written in stone on the walls, and the stela that I'm talking about, and others, showing you that they weren't even allowed into Egypt by decree. So it wasn't some lollygag thing like New York or whatever, which he's going to try to pull later. And everybody that has anything to know about Egyptology knows this fact. But he's going to pretend that he studies a lot, he knows a lot about it, but has never heard any of these things and just wants to spread lies.
Back to Oslin's answer to the question.
Well, then what did they actually look like? Well, genetic studies tell us that they were genetically shifted towards the populations of the Near East.
Whenever you see this statement in the papers, it's usually accompanied by a word which is also extremely telling. The word is ancient. They'll say the ancient populations of the Near East and Levant, or modern Europeans. Some go as far as saying West Europeans. No one has ever said Bantu about any of it. But these are the ones that are trying to include themselves. You see, whites don't include them enough and take movies like The Little Mermaid and things and try to make them black just so they'll feel better about themselves. In reality, they want to change their history where they were the smart ones. They were Whyteys. They were doing things. We was Bible. And you can tell how that would easily get to a people who really didn't have any clue whatsoever. Let's continue.
Which basically means that the populations that existed within ancient Egypt, much of those populations may have appeared physically similar to populations within the Middle East.
And that's at that time. And later you can find, and DNA is shown quite a few times, which I've shown, and he's going to show it even later in this video, ironically, that those same people with that same genetics are Western Europeans, hinged on Britain and Ireland, Scotland, and so on. And hey, there's some more blondes and redheads there too. Crazy, isn't it?
What did the ancient Egyptians truly look like? Aslan references a study conducted by the Max Planck Institute in 2017 to support his argument. According to that study, the populations of ancient Egypt exhibited genetic shifts towards the populations of the Middle East.
It actually says closely related to ancient populations from the Near East, where there were these Aryan type people that had R1A and R1B genetics, and others, all in North Africa, Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia areas, which leaves them totally out. And they don't like that. Now he's going to turn around and tell you that all science is a lie and he's the smart one now. Now this right here, it shows you that the DNA goes from 1400 BC to 400 CE, going through that. And they got the first genome-wide data on 3 of these mummies. But out of the 150 they tested, they were like 106 of them were viable DNA, 93 were to the point they could tell you which haplogroup and so on and give clear connections, probably to the point they could tell you you are the father or not the father and so on. And then there was only 3 of them they got the entire genetic sequence out of. This was fantastic because DNA is always real hard to get, but due to current methods and taking it out of certain areas and being extremely careful about it, they were able to prove that that's the way it works. The study found that modern Egyptians share more ancestry with sub-Saharan Africans than the ancient Egyptians did. And that's because in the paper it tells you they showed up in post-Roman times. And so after that point, there's an admix in these people. And there's also about a 16% component of Arabic type people. So they didn't see any of this change. It was a continuity went all the way through to post-Roman times. Blacks want to flip this, like there's a little admix from slavery, so that means we were the ancient Egyptians somehow. Do you understand how you can logically put that together? They do somehow, but then again, they're not known for science, are they? Let's continue.
While this may seem like a well-founded argument supported by scientific research, it is, unfortunately, biased and misleading. Allow me to...
In a minute, he's going to call them racist, too. So, biased and misleading. What's he trying to say? Oh, well, blacks are biased and misleading, and they're also unscientific and have no grounds for what they're talking about other than jealousy. Let's continue.
To clarify why. The primary issue revolves around the timeline. Most of us associate locations to the population that currently occupy it. In other words, to the populations we see living there today. However,
Now, I've used this term myself too, and it's said right directly in the papers. Well, whenever they tried to say, well, Jesus looked like a Middle Eastern guy of now. And it's like, well, that demographic couldn't even have been in effect back then. So whenever they say the ancient populations of Levant and Anatolia and the current Europeans, Western Europeans, that starts to make more sense. Something totally connected, something blacks can't stand. Well, why? Because they're real jealous and they really like lying about everything. Given the opportunity, they've started lying about everybody. Did you realize that they claim they're the ancient Amerindians? They were here first. In fact, they say they're first in every single place this was. And that is only in effect if they want to claim themselves as Homo erectus. Well, they actually are somewhat, but then they have this weird form of Homo erectus that no one else in the world has ever had in their genetics, showing you that they never made it out of Africa. They actually didn't even know anything outside the Congo existed, but they're busy trying to steal your history. And they want to claim wewas, Whyteys. Now this is a current demographic that's there and the way that they look now, but that is not the way that they looked in ancient times. That's the reason they put that word ancient in front of Levantines and Anatolians, and then they say modern Europeans. Did they say anything about Bantu? No, they really didn't. They talk about Eastern Sub-Saharan Africans and how that showed up and everything into it, and Bantu showed up way after the Roman periods. It's hilarious that in that paper they describe that whenever the Romans showed up, they had a few of them with them, some of them with a vaulted cranium, which surprised some people, and the other ones were platerine. What is that? It means New World monkey. Don't feel bad, he's fixing to show prognathism, which is a more simian or ape-like jaw appearance that all sub-Saharans have, and then try to claim that the Egyptians had it.
does not work like that. People migrate, mix, fight, experience genocides, or flee conflicts areas, resulting in populations today that may not fully resemble those of millennia ago.
Oh, he just said what I said, but he's saying it to try to say they were black before. Whenever I can show you pre-dynastic and everything else that wasn't in effect. And actually, West Sub-Saharans that are trying to claim this, again, did not even know that any of this existed, nor related to anybody who did. But some of these genetic labs won't do very much of a testing. They won't check 24 to 28 loci on it. They'll check about 8, and then they'll say, well, you have E1B genetics, whether it's E1B1A or E1B1B. They don't go to that point, and then they tell you could be related to ancient Ramses somehow. If you're a black person, this would be from admix, where it took over your people, and you ended up getting a larger cranial form right there at Asillar Man. All before were a small football-brained people. They don't look anything like this. And I don't care how dark wood gets over time. Just like I don't care that red ochre is not black. Understand this statement, red is not black. The Egyptians showed black people on their walls, even with prognathism and so on. They don't ever show themselves that way. They show a tanned looking male and a real pale female. And the only way that happens is because they can get that pale, but the males are outside working and doing all these things, and they're able to keep their women out of the sun and keep them fair, which is a real important thing in there, in the Bible, and all kinds of things. There's people in the Bible that even apologize for being tanned because their brothers made them work in the field. Don't look upon me, O Israel, because I'm dark, yet comely. Blacks try to use that and try to pretend that they were in it also.